time, I would like to introduce our guest speaker, Mrs. Pamela Donovan Hall, with Hometown Veterans.
Veterans, their families, townspeople, school children, and special guests. It's a great honor for me to be here in this capacity today. I'm just someone who happens to be in love with the town's history. Services like this have been held in this town for over 100 years. Initially, today was called Decoration Day. The Civil War soldiers would be escorted by the school children to the Norwich Bridge Cemetery, and on the way the children would pick wildflowers beside the road. Once they arrived at the cemetery, the children would start singing patriotic songs, and while they and the veterans both scattered flowers on the graves of our veterans. Short services were then held at the cemetery. Flags were used in later years to decorate the graves. The schools of Murrayfield and the high school also had their own services, like an assembly, usually the day before. And the children would recite essays and poems and sing patriotic songs, and the veterans would be invited and they would tell the children about their war experiences. This service has been held here on this village green and always involved the school children, much like today. A white cross was erected on the town common and decorated for the unknown soldiers. Dinner would then be served to the veterans by their wives in the church vestry or their own hall, and church services were held in the afternoon. Honor rolls were erected in this park after each great war, and the little girls would place flowers in front of the honor rolls while the returning soldiers stood at attention. I'm so sick of reading town history books in that if you didn't have a title like a doctor or a lawyer, or were not enormously wealthy, you weren't mentioned. You became a number. Just a number, not a person, not a name, not a somebody, just a number. But yet these people who became numbers were the ones who made our regiments and made up our community. They were the ones who cleared the land, built our stone walls, built our houses and buildings. They were the dirt farmers and the mill workers, the carpenters, who were much different than we are. They fished the same rivers, saw the same trees, and perhaps even lived in our homes. As townspeople, I think we have a lot in common with these. Perhaps what attracted them to live here has attracted us. Even though no history book has ever been written about the town of Huntington, what essays and articles that have been written have always mentioned the fact that General John Pershing, a famous World War I general, visited our town right after the end of World War I, and, quote, he bestowed his presence on the Huntington people. I guess that's our claim to fame. All the wars had a great impact on this town and its people. Over the town's history of 240 years, a lot of men and a few women have left here to serve their country. To us as townspeople, they were the real heroes. At the outbreak of the Revolutionary War, our early pioneers had just settled their families here. As a town, we had Samuel Ellis, who was a Revolutionary War veteran. He lived on God's Hill and was a farmer. A man in Westfield made a deal with Samuel, that if Samuel went down to Westfield, reaped his acre of rye, then in exchange Samuel would get flaxseed. Well, the guy in Westfield really thought this was a bargain because he figured it would take at least 2 days for Sam to do this. Sam got up one morning, went down to Westfield. He reaped his acre of rye, he bound it, stacked it, and slept home that night. He was 80 years old. We had Isaac Williams, who came from a town north of Utica, New York. He settled in Indian Hollow and was a farmer. He made frequent trips back to his New York town. Sometimes he would take a cow with him and live on its milk. He had a black Indian pony. So one morning he decided to visit New York, and he went to send his son up to the pasture to get this horse. Well, Isaac waited and waited and waited and waited, and he became very impatient. So he decided to leave on foot. This 200-mile journey he made in just 5 days. He was 70 years old. During the Civil War, the trains with soldiers occasionally came through this town, and the townspeople would go to the railroad station and wait beside the track, and if it was at night, they would light torches. And at times, the soldiers going through here and on the trains got a 15-gun salute as they went by. We had at least 2 documented homes in town that were used for the Underground Railroad in freeing the slaves to Canada. We had Captain Pease, Right after the Civil War, he came into town and he built the block where the Country Journal office is now. He held a store there for 41 years. He had been a captain of an all-black regiment. We had Austin T. Hancock. He was a sled maker in Knightville. He enlisted in the Civil War, leaving 2 small daughters and a wife behind. I've had the privilege from the family to read his diaries and letters. He wrote to his daughter on her 5th birthday from North Carolina, and I quote, "I have nothing to send you for your birthday but my love. I see a great many little children here. They are all black with curly hair. They do not look as neat and clean as my little girls do, but I suppose that their fathers and mothers love them just as well as we do you." We had a resident that as a young soldier was stationed in Washington, D.C. He was at Ford's Theater the night Abraham Lincoln was there and witnessed the president's assassination. We had at least 7 veterans who lived in town who fought in the Battle of Gettysburg and the Battle of Bull Run. One resident living on Norwich Hill assisted with the capture of Fort Sumter as he laid under the cannon for 9 days. A lot of our other men in town served in Libby and Andersonville prisons. We had a doctor in town who was a drummer boy in the 7th Mass Regiment. We had a young man who lived in town who painted the flag on the rock up on 112. His father was a Civil War veteran who also spent time in the Andersonville prison. We had Lieutenant Robert Cross, who was a pilot during World War I. His plane was shot down, and the Green Bridge here is named in his memory. We had another casualty in World War I, Augustus LaForge. His family did not find out that he was killed in action until 3 months after he died. He was 24 years old. A memorial service was held then at the St. Thomas Church. During World War I, some families were more affected than others, as Mrs. Kirby had 5 sons that was sent off in the war, and the Bates family had 3. The Red Cross chapter was formed in town, and the women were busy knitting and sewing. These women made nightshirts and slings, socks and sweaters, and by the end of the war, these women had sent 1,866 number of garments, had made over $2,000, and the townspeople here bought over $81,000 worth of Liberty bonds. Trains would go by filled with soldiers, and the townspeople would again go down to the railroad tracks, and this time wave small American flags to these soldiers as they passed through. There was a regiment of soldiers stationed in this town to guard our railroad bridges. And there was Huntington Manufacturing Company that was located on Upper Russell Road. They were making khaki cloth for the government. We had George Allard, who was the first man in town to be drafted in World War I. He spoke fluent French and was immediately sent to France, where he was wounded and lay on the battlefield for over 2 hours. He was admitted to the hospital, where he convalesced for 6 weeks, and upon being discharged from the hospital, he was sent back to the trenches to help install a telephone system. He did make it home, but when he arrived home, he had lost his father and his sister. We had Gertrude Eastman, who was a nurse serving in France during World War I. She wrote letters home telling about the many raids and about the hard work. At one point, the hospital had 4,000 injured soldiers with only 100 nurses to care for them. While she was in France, she fell in love with a lieutenant and was married there. After the war, she and her husband stopped in town briefly, and the townspeople gave them a reception. They moved to Louisiana, and 3 years later she died at age 33, leaving an 18-month-old son. We had Michael Dowling, who was born here in this town in 1866. When he was 10 years old, his mother died, and his father started for out west and put Michael in a school and never came back for him. At 14 years old, he was frozen in a snowbank during a blizzard. One arm, one hand, and both feet had to be amputated. Through his own determination and courage, he sought an education and became a president of a bank in Minnesota. During World War I, he joined the Red Cross and went overseas for 8 months talking to our soldiers who were handicapped. Upon returning back to the States, he toured the United States for 2 years and talked with veterans who were also missing limbs. During World War II, 143 men and 7 women entered the service. 7 men never returned. During the Vietnam era, a local historian has related to me that something weird was going on. The whole county, The draft quota for the whole county was 2 men per month, but yet, within a year, 8 of our young men were drafted. I've talked with some of these early Vietnam veterans. They told me they felt 100% supported by their families, friends, and the townspeople. They never, ever felt lack of support from we as people. And I think that says a lot about our community and the character of the people living in it. Upon returning from Vietnam, they may have had their problems. They may have had their problems within themselves of things that they saw and wanted to forget. But I think as townspeople, we should take pride in the fact that we were not the cause of their problems. Our country is what it is today because of the achievements of these past generations. You won't find these people mentioned in any history book. You won't find their names indexed in the National Archives. They weren't famous people. They were the important ones. To the veterans here today, we say thank you. We are proud of you and what you have achieved for us in our wonderful country. And to the ones that have died while serving our country, or the veterans who have passed on before us, we view your graves as being as important to us as the most massive tomb of any general. Before I conclude, I'd like to set the record straight. I mentioned earlier about General Pershing coming to town. Well, he did visit our town in October of 1919. But the difference is, no one knew he was here. He came to visit his deceased wife's aunt, Mrs. Henry Stanton, who lived on the corner of Pleasant and Pine Street. He came with 2 other men, incognito. They arrived in an automobile, dressed in civilian clothes, and all wearing raincoats. They visited Mrs. Stanton for a while, stopped at the village down here for 5 minutes into a shop, and left town. So much for titles. Thank you.